Wait. Stop everything. Because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you know about self-worth, about marriage, about what happens when someone finally shows you your real value. There's a woman named Sarah. She is 32 years old. She has been married for 7 years. Sarah thought she had a good marriage. Sarah thought she was happy. Until her anniversary dinner. Sarah's husband's name is Michael. Michael is 35 years old. Michael is a successful accountant. Michael makes decent money. Michael provides for their family. Michael is what society calls a good husband. But on their 7th anniversary, the evening that was supposed to celebrate 7 years of love and commitment, Michael said something that would change Sarah's life forever. They were sitting in an expensive restaurant. Sarah had spent the entire day preparing. Sarah had gotten her hair done. Sarah had bought a new dress. Sarah had made reservations at the restaurant they had gone to for their first date. Sarah was excited. Sarah thought Michael would be excited too. But Michael looked at Sarah across the table and he said, "You know what? I've been thinking about this for a while, and I need to be honest with you. You're not worth much, Sarah. You gave up your career for me. You gave up your dreams for me. And what do you have to show for it? Nothing. You're a housewife with no credentials, no accomplishments, no value in the job market. You're completely dependent on me. And frankly, I'm tired of it." Sarah felt something break inside her. Sarah felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Sarah felt the person she loved, the person she had built her entire life around, tell her that she was worthless. Sarah said, "What are you talking about? I gave up my career because we agreed that I would stay home and raise our children. We made that decision together." Michael said, "I know. And I regret it. I regret investing in you. You have nothing to offer the world. You have no income. You have no professional accomplishments. You're just a housewife and that has no value." Sarah tried to respond. Sarah tried to defend herself. Sarah tried to explain that raising 2 children, managing a household, creating a home, that these things have value. But Michael wasn't listening. Michael was done with Sarah. Michael was telling her that he had wasted 7 years on someone who was worthless. And then Michael did something cruel. Michael said, "I've met someone else. Someone who has her own career, her own success, her own value. And I'm going to ask for a divorce." Sarah sat there in that expensive restaurant, surrounded by couples celebrating their love, while her husband told her that she had no worth. Sarah got up and she left. Sarah walked out of that restaurant and she sat on a bench outside and she cried. And that's when he appeared. His name is Alexander. He is 42 years old. He is a billionaire entrepreneur. Alexander was leaving the restaurant when he saw Sarah sitting on the bench, crying. Alexander could have walked past. Alexander could have ignored her. Alexander could have been just another wealthy man who didn't notice people in pain. But Alexander stopped. Alexander sat down next to Sarah. Alexander asked if she was okay. And Sarah broke. Sarah told him everything. Sarah told him about Michael. Sarah told him about being told she was worthless. Sarah told him about her abandoned career. Sarah told him about her children. Sarah told him about her life. And Alexander said something that changed everything. "You're not worthless. You're invaluable. And I'm going to show you." This is the story of what happened next. This is the story of a woman discovering her own value. This is the story of what happens when someone finally sees you, really sees you, and tells you the truth about your worth. But it's also a story about something darker. It's a story about what happens when gratitude turns into dependency. It's a story about what happens when rescue looks like love at first. It's a story about the complicated line between being saved and being owned. If you've ever felt like you didn't matter, if you've ever been told that you had no value, if you've ever sacrificed your dreams for someone else, this story is for you. Rate this story from 0 to 10. Tell me if you think Michael was right to feel that way. Tell me if you think Sarah should have fought harder for her marriage. Tell me if you believe that a billionaire's money can buy you happiness. But most importantly, tell me this. If someone finally showed you your worth, Would you follow them anywhere? Even if it meant leaving everything behind. Because Sarah had to make that choice. And what she discovered will shock you. Let's find out what Alexander did to show Sarah that she was worth everything. Sarah had been invisible for 7 years. Sarah met Michael in college. Sarah was smart and ambitious. Sarah had dreams of becoming a marketing executive. Sarah was building a future for herself. Sarah was someone. But then Sarah fell in love with Michael. And Sarah's dreams slowly, gradually, imperceptibly began to fade. When Sarah got pregnant with their first child, Sarah and Michael made a decision together. They decided that Sarah would take time off from work to be with the baby. It was supposed to be temporary. It was supposed to be just a few years until the child started school. But then Sarah got pregnant again. And then they moved to a new city for Michael's job. And then there was never a good time for Sarah to go back to work. And then years had passed. Sarah tried to stay engaged with her career. Sarah read industry publications. Sarah went to conferences when she could. Sarah kept up with what was happening in her field. But the gap grew wider. The gap between who Sarah used to be and who Sarah had become grew wider every year. Sarah told Michael, "I want to go back to work. The kids are in school now. It's time for me to pursue my career again." Michael said, "But who will manage the house? Who will handle the kids' schedules? Who will make sure everything runs smoothly?" Sarah said, "We can figure that out. We can hire help. We can make it work." Michael said, "We can't afford it. My job is demanding. I need you to handle the home front." Sarah tried again the following year. Sarah said, "Michael, I've been out of the workforce for 5 years. I'm becoming more and more irrelevant. I need to start building my career again." Michael said, "Now is not a good time. The company is in the middle of restructuring. I need you to focus on the house and the kids." Sarah stopped asking. Sarah accepted that her career was gone. Sarah accepted that she was no longer the ambitious woman she used to be. Sarah became the invisible housewife. Sarah did everything. Sarah managed the household. Sarah raised the children. Sarah created a home that was beautiful and functional and warm. Sarah did the invisible work that keeps a family running. But Michael didn't see it. Michael didn't acknowledge it. Michael took it for granted. Michael expected it. Michael saw it as the minimum that Sarah should be doing. Not as a contribution but as her obligation. 7 years into their marriage, Sarah was no longer a person. Sarah was a function. Sarah was someone who existed to serve Michael's life. Sarah had no identity outside of being Michael's wife and the children's mother. And Sarah had internalized this. Sarah had started to believe that she had no value. Sarah had started to believe that she was nothing without Michael. Sarah had started to believe that she couldn't survive on her own because she had been out of the workforce too long. Sarah had become invisible to herself. And then came the anniversary dinner. Sarah had spent the entire day preparing for their anniversary dinner. Sarah got up early and made a special breakfast for Michael and the children. Sarah did the household tasks that needed to be done. Sarah coordinated schedules and managed activities and handled all the invisible work that makes a family function. Then Sarah went to the salon. Sarah got her hair done. Sarah got a manicure. Sarah wanted to feel beautiful for her husband. Sarah wanted to celebrate 7 years of marriage. Sarah went home and she put on the new dress she had bought, a beautiful red dress that made her feel powerful and confident for the first time in months. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror and she thought, "I'm a good wife. I'm a good mother. I'm a good person. I've built a good life." Sarah felt hopeful about the evening. Sarah felt like maybe things could change. Maybe Michael would see her again. Maybe they could reconnect. When Michael came home from work, Sarah was ready. Sarah was waiting at the door in her red dress. Sarah was smiling. Michael looked at her and he said, "You look nice. Let's go." Those were the only kind words he would speak to her that night. They arrived at the restaurant where they had been on their first date. Sarah felt nostalgic. Sarah remembered being young and in love and full of possibility. They sat down at a table by the window. Michael ordered wine. They looked at the menu. And then Michael said it. Michael said, "Sarah, I need to be honest with you about something." Sarah thought he was going to say something sweet. Sarah thought he was going to compliment her or tell her he loved her. But Michael said, "I've been thinking about our marriage, and I've realized something. You're not worth much, Sarah. You gave up your career for me. You have no accomplishments. You have no value in the job market. You're completely dependent on me. And frankly, I'm tired of supporting someone who brings nothing to the table." Sarah felt the world stop. Sarah felt her heart stop beating. Sarah heard the words but couldn't process them. Sarah said, "What?" Michael continued, "I'm serious, Sarah. Look at yourself. You're a housewife with no credentials. What would you do if I left you? You couldn't get a decent job. You couldn't support yourself. You have no value. You're just nothing." Sarah tried to defend herself. Sarah said, "I gave up my career because we decided together that I would raise our children. I've been managing our household for 7 years. That has value." Michael said, "No, it doesn't. Any woman can do that. You're not special. You're not valuable. You're just ordinary. And I'm done being married to someone ordinary who has nothing to offer." Sarah said, "Michael, what are you talking about? Are you unhappy?" Michael said, "I'm not just unhappy, Sarah. I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to be married to someone who has accomplished nothing. I'm embarrassed to tell people what you do, or rather what you don't do." Sarah felt tears starting. Sarah said, Are you asking for a divorce?" Michael said, "I've met someone else. Someone who has her own career, her own success, her own value. Someone who has something to contribute to a relationship besides cooking and cleaning. I'm going to ask for a divorce." And that was it. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of sacrifice. 7 years of building a life together. 7 years of being invisible. All of it summed up in the statement that she had no value. Sarah got up. Sarah couldn't sit there anymore. Sarah walked out of the restaurant. Sarah walked outside. Sarah sat on a bench in the cool night air and she cried. Sarah cried because the person she loved had told her she was worthless. Sarah cried because she had sacrificed her career and now she had nothing. Sarah cried because she had no idea how she was going to survive on her own. Sarah sat on that bench, broken and terrified and completely lost. And that's when Alexander found her. Alexander was leaving the restaurant through the side exit when he saw Sarah sitting on the bench, crying. Alexander could have walked past. Alexander could have minded his own business. Alexander could have assumed she was just another woman having a bad night. But Alexander stopped. Alexander sat down next to Sarah. Alexander asked if she was okay. Sarah looked up. Sarah saw a man in an expensive suit with kind eyes. Sarah didn't know who he was. Sarah didn't care who he was. Sarah just needed someone to listen. And Sarah broke. Sarah told him everything. Sarah told him about Michael. Sarah told him about giving up her career. Sarah told him about being told she was worthless on her anniversary. Sarah told him about the threat of divorce. Sarah told him about her children. Sarah told him about the fact that she had no idea how she was going to survive. Alexander listened without judgment. Alexander asked questions. Alexander understood. And then Alexander said, "You're not worthless. You're invaluable. And I'm going to show you." Alexander helped Sarah up. Alexander took her to a different restaurant, a quieter place where she could breathe. Alexander got her water and a warm meal. Alexander sat with her while she cried. Alexander said, "I don't know you, but I know this. What your husband said to you was cruel. What your husband said to you was wrong. Your value is not determined by your income or your job title. Your value is inherent. Your value is who you are as a person." Sarah said, "But he's right. I can't work. I've been out of the job market for 7 years. Nobody will hire me." Alexander said. That's not true. But even if it were, your value isn't about being hireable. Your value isn't about how much money you make. Your value is about who you are. You raised 2 children. You created a home. You gave 7 years of your life to building a family. That has immense value. Sarah said, How can you say that when my own husband doesn't see it? Alexander said, Because your husband is wrong. And he's also blind. But I can see your value. And I'm going to help you see it too. Over the next few months, Alexander became Sarah's mentor, her therapist, her friend. Alexander helped Sarah find a lawyer. Alexander helped Sarah understand her rights. Alexander helped Sarah prepare for the divorce proceedings. But more importantly, Alexander helped Sarah rebuild her sense of self. Alexander hired Sarah as a consultant for his company. Not as charity. Not as pity. But because Alexander genuinely believed that Sarah had skills and insights that could help his business. Sarah was terrified. Sarah hadn't worked in 7 years. Sarah didn't believe in herself. But Alexander pushed her. Alexander challenged her. Alexander asked her hard questions and demanded honest answers. Alexander treated her like an intelligent woman with valuable ideas. Not like a housewife who had lost her way. Sarah started to rediscover who she was. Sarah started to remember the ambitious woman she used to be. Sarah started to build confidence in her own abilities. And as Sarah transformed, something happened. Sarah started to fall in love with Alexander. Alexander was kind in a way that Michael had never been. Alexander was respectful of her abilities. Alexander believed in her potential. Alexander saw her, really saw her. Not as a wife or a mother, but as a woman with value. Sarah told Alexander, I think I'm falling in love with you. Alexander said, I know. And I care about you deeply. But I need you to understand something important. You need to fall in love with yourself first. You need to build your own life, your own career, your own identity. And you need to do that not for me, but for you. You need to prove to yourself that you have value. Not because I say so, but because you know it. Sarah understood. Sarah continued to build her career. Sarah continued to work for Alexander's company. Sarah continued to rebuild her sense of self. And slowly, Sarah became a woman who had value not because someone told her she had value, but because she had created value through her own work and her own effort. 1 year after the anniversary dinner that changed everything. 1 year of rebuilding, 1 year of struggle, 1 year of becoming someone new. Sarah had a choice to make. Sarah had successfully rebuilt her career. Sarah was no longer the invisible housewife. Sarah was no longer dependent on anyone else's approval or financial support. Sarah was now a senior consultant at Alexander's company, working on major strategic projects that challenged her intellect and rewarded her insight. Sarah was making a 6-figure salary. Sarah had her own apartment in the city. Sarah had her own life that was completely separate from any man. Sarah had business cards with her name on them. Sarah had a title that meant something. Sarah had colleagues who respected her. Sarah had a future that she had created through her own effort. Sarah had custody of her 2 children half the time. Sarah was building a relationship with them that was based on her being a person with her own identity, not just a mother. Sarah was showing her children, especially her daughter, what it looked like for a woman to have value and to know it. And Michael was out of the picture. Michael had married the woman he said was so much more valuable than Sarah. Michael had gotten what he wanted. Michael was no longer part of Sarah's life except for financial obligations and custody schedules. But what Michael didn't understand, what Michael never understood, was that his absence had freed Sarah. His departure had forced Sarah to discover who she was. His cruelty on that anniversary night had been, paradoxically, the greatest gift he could have given her, the gift of necessity, the gift of no choice but to rebuild. Because Sarah had no safety net. Sarah had no choice but to succeed. Sarah had no option but to discover her own value. And now, 1 year later, Alexander asked her to marry him. It wasn't a romantic proposal. It wasn't done at a fancy restaurant or on a beach at sunset. It was done in Alexander's office at the end of a long day of work. Alexander said, "Sarah, I love you. But more importantly, I respect you." Sarah looked up from her computer. Sarah asked, "What do you mean?" Alexander said, "I mean that I could love anyone. But I can only respect someone who knows their own worth. And you do. You finally know your own worth. You know it in a way that goes deeper than any external validation. You know it because you've proven it to yourself." Sarah said, "What are you asking?" Alexander said, "I'm asking you to marry me. Not because I want to rescue you anymore. You don't need rescuing. I'm asking you to marry me because I want to build a life with someone who is my equal. Someone who doesn't need me to define her value. Someone who brings her own value to the table." Sarah felt tears coming. Sarah said, "Yes." But Sarah also said something else. Something that was even more important than the yes. Sarah said, "Thank you for showing me my value. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. But I need you to understand something critical. My value was always there. It was never Michael's job to give it to me. It was never your job to give it to me. I had to discover it myself. You gave me permission to look for it. You gave me tools to search for it. But I'm the one who found it." Alexander said, "That's exactly right. That's exactly why I'm marrying you. Because you understand that your value comes from within, not from someone else's approval. Because you understand that self-worth isn't dependent on external validation." Sarah thought about Michael as she heard those words. Sarah thought about the man who had told her she was worthless. Sarah thought about the moment that had broken her completely. And Sarah realized something profound. Michael's cruelty hadn't taken away her value. Michael's cruelty had just revealed that he had never seen her value in the first place. Michael's cruelty was about Michael's own insecurity and his own inability to see beyond surface accomplishments and job titles. Sarah had never been worthless. Sarah had just been invisible. Not because she had no value, but because she had let someone else control the narrative about what value meant. Sarah thought about the 7 years she had sacrificed. Sarah thought about the career she had abandoned. Sarah thought about the woman she had stopped being. But Sarah also realized something else. Those 7 years weren't wasted. Those 7 years had taught her something invaluable. They had taught her what it meant to sacrifice yourself for someone else. They had taught her what it meant to be invisible. They had taught her what she never wanted to experience again. In that way, Michael had given her a gift, not through his kindness, but through his cruelty. Michael had forced Sarah to rebuild. Michael had forced Sarah to become someone stronger than she had ever been. So here's what I want you to understand about Sarah's story. And I need you to really hear this because this is the most important part. Sarah's worth wasn't determined by Michael's opinion of her. Sarah's worth wasn't determined by whether she had a job or not. Sarah's worth wasn't determined by how much money she made or how many accomplishments she had. Sarah's worth wasn't even determined by Alexander's billions or his belief in her. Sarah's worth was always there. Sarah always had value. But Sarah had let someone else tell her what her value was. Sarah had internalized someone else's definition of her worth. Sarah had accepted the lie that she was nothing without external validation. And that's the trap. That's the trap that so many people fall into. That's the trap that comes from being invisible for so long. That's the trap that comes from sacrificing yourself for someone else. That's the trap that comes from believing that your worth is something that someone else can determine. Here's the truth. Your worth is inherent. Your value is not something that anyone can give you or take away. Your value is not something that is determined by your job title or your income or your relationship status or anyone's opinion of you. Your worth is something that you have simply because you exist. Your value is something that is intrinsic to who you are as a human being. But, and this is critical, just because your worth is inherent doesn't mean you'll automatically feel worthy. Just because you have value doesn't mean you'll automatically believe that you have value. Just because you're valuable doesn't mean you'll automatically act like someone who knows their own worth. Sarah's journey wasn't about discovering that she had value. Sarah's journey was about learning to believe that she had value. Sarah's journey was about moving from intellectual knowledge, I should have value, to emotional belief, I do have value, to behavioral change. I'm going to act like someone who knows her own worth. And this is where the work happens. This is where real transformation occurs. This is where theory becomes practice. Because anyone can tell you that you're valuable. Alexander could tell Sarah that she was valuable. A therapist could tell Sarah that she was valuable. A support group could tell Sarah that she was valuable. But until Sarah believed it herself, until Sarah took action based on that belief, until Sarah rebuilt her own life through her own effort, the knowledge was just words. What Sarah had to do was prove it to herself. Sarah had to go back into the job market. Sarah had to apply for positions and face rejection. Sarah had to rebuild her skills. Sarah had to work harder than anyone else because she had to overcome the gap created by 7 years out of the workforce. Sarah had to earn her salary. Sarah had to create her own career. And through doing that work, through taking that action, Sarah transformed from someone who was told she was valuable into someone who knew she was valuable. If you are like Sarah, if you've sacrificed your dreams for someone else, if you've let someone else define your worth, if you've become invisible in your own life, understand this. Your value is not dependent on anyone else's opinion. Your value is not determined by your job title or your income. Your value is not contingent on being someone's wife or mother or partner. Your value is inherent. Your value is always there. But understanding that intellectually is only the first step. The real work comes in believing it emotionally and then acting on it behaviorally. What you need to do is rediscover who you are. What you need to do is stop waiting for someone to tell you that you're valuable and start believing it yourself. What you need to do is take action to rebuild your sense of self. What you need to do is invest in yourself the way Sarah invested in herself. This might mean going back to school, starting a new career, ending a relationship that is diminishing you, moving to a new city, learning new skills, building a new network, creating something that is entirely yours. It means taking your own life seriously. It means treating yourself with the same respect that you would show to someone you deeply admired. It means making decisions based on what's best for you, not on what's best for someone else. And yes, sometimes that help comes from a mentor or a therapist or a friend. Sometimes that help comes from someone who sees your potential and believes in you. Sometimes that help comes from a billionaire who gives you an opportunity. But the most important thing, the thing that actually matters, is that you do the work yourself. You rebuild yourself. You create your own value. You become someone who is worthy of your own respect. Because here's the truth that Sarah had to learn, the truth that it took a year of hard work and sacrifice to understand. It doesn't matter if Alexander is a billionaire or a regular person. It doesn't matter if Alexander has billions of dollars to invest in your growth. It doesn't matter if Alexander is handsome or successful or charming. What matters is that Sarah did the work to rebuild her life. What matters is that Sarah created her own value through her own effort. What matters is that Sarah became someone she respects. What matters is that Sarah reached a place where she could say to Alexander, I don't need you, but I choose you. And that's what real worth looks like. Not worth that's dependent on someone else's wealth or opinion or validation. But worth that comes from knowing yourself and believing in your own value. Worth that comes from the inside out, not from the outside. And there's something else I want you to understand about Sarah's story. The invisibility wasn't entirely Michael's fault. Sarah allowed herself to become invisible. Sarah made choices that led to invisibility. Sarah sacrificed her own identity in exchange for security and status and the role of wife and mother. Now, this doesn't excuse Michael's cruelty. Michael's behavior was cruel and inexcusable. Michael's treatment of Sarah was wrong. But Sarah also has to take responsibility for the fact that she allowed herself to disappear. Sarah has to understand that she gave up her dreams. Sarah has to recognize that she chose to become dependent. Sarah has to see that she was complicit in her own invisibility. And that's actually empowering. Because if you allowed yourself to become invisible, then you have the power to become visible again. If you made choices that led to your own invisibility, then you can make different choices now. This isn't about blame. This isn't about guilt. This is about agency. This is about recognizing that you have the power to change your own life. Sarah found that power. Sarah used that power. Sarah rebuilt her life through her own effort and her own choices. And then, from a place of complete independence and self-knowledge, Sarah chose to marry Alexander. Not because she needed him. Not because he had rescued her. Not because his billions made her feel complete. But because she had become someone who was worth building a life with. Because she had created value through her own effort. Because she had discovered that self-worth isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you create. And that's what makes her story powerful. That's what makes her choice meaningful. That's what makes her marriage real. Sarah found her worth. And you can too. Not through someone else's validation. Not through someone else's money. Not through someone else's belief in you. But through your own effort. Through your own choices. Through your own decision to stop being invisible and start being visible. To yourself first and then to the world. That's real worth. That's real value. That's real transformation. I'll see you next time.